A few weeks ago, Phil Gramm, the chief economics advisor to presidential candidate John McCain, created a major furor when he called Americans whiners. Well, ladies and gentlemen, calling Americans whiners is not a really good way to get votes for your candidate, and it's not a really good way to win friends and influence people. So, justifiably, Phil Gramm was, as they say, thrown under the bus and is no longer associated with the McCain campaign. But not covered quite so heavily in the media were some of the other things that Phil Gramm said during this interview. And some of those things that he said, one of the major things he said was, "You've heard of mental depression. This is a mental recession," he said. Mr. Gramm said the constant drubbing of the media on the economy's problems is one reason people have lost confidence. Various surveys show that consumer confidence has fallen precipitously this year to the lowest levels in 2 to 3 decades. "Misery sells newspaper," Mr. Gramm said. "Thank God the economy is not as bad as you see in the newspaper every day." Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have an example in our own backyard. The Sunday Post-Dispatch. Headline: "Foreclosure pain spreads. Common ground. Working class neighborhoods, manicured subdivisions alike, are hit. More coming. Strapped owners and banks. Can't find buyers. Homes stand empty." And then there's a picture of a guy cleaning out the basement of a foreclosed house. The article's full of statistics and anecdotes about people who've lost their homes and the great amount of foreclosures that have happened in the St. Louis area over the last few years. Ladies and gentlemen, there are people in this country that are having problems. There's no doubt about it. Some of these people are our friends, some of these people are our family. And I would be intellectually dishonest if I did not concede that fact. But it's one thing to say there are people that are having problems, and it's another thing to say, as a lot of our politicians do, make the blanket statement that, oh, Americans are all having problems, we're all just in economic trouble. It's not quite like that, ladies and gentlemen. One of the other quotes that Gramm had during that interview that wasn't well covered was, he noted that growth has held up at about 1% despite all the publicity over losing jobs to China, illegal immigration, housing and credit problems, and record oil prices. "We may have a recession," he said. "We haven't had one yet. We have never been more dominant." The definition of recession is 2 straight quarters of economic decline. And by that definition, we have not had a recession. In fact, according to the Commerce Department, the statistics on gross domestic product, that's the total value of all goods and services produced in the economy, is going to exceed $11.7 trillion. That's trillion with a T. $11.7 trillion this year. Now, that compares to where we were a number of years ago. If you look back to 1960 and use inflation-adjusted gross domestic product numbers back then, it was $2.5 trillion. Today, $11.7 trillion. In that same period, population has gone from 180 million people to 304 million people. So in other words, our economy, our gross domestic product has more than quadrupled, while population has gone up by less than doubled. So we are definitely a more wealthy country than we were a number of years ago. And in addition, if you look at our economy compared to the economies of the rest of the world, if you take non-inflation adjusted gross domestic product, it amounts to $45,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country. That's $5,000 more than Germany, over $10,000 more than Japan. And that big bugaboo China that we're all so scared of, it's 20 times as great as the gross domestic product per person in China. Those people in China their gross domestic product is about $2,500 per person right now compared to ours. So we are a far more stronger economy than those places, and a much bigger one and a much more powerful one. Another statistic that's looked at a lot is unemployment. Our unemployment right now is right around 5.5%. You go back to 1960, it was 5.5% back then as well. And I keep using 1960 because that's kind of, to me, the beginning of the modern world. I was born in 1955, and I can kind of remember 1960, so I kind of like that date. But As I said, unemployment back then was also 5.5%. In our own lifetimes, in 1982, in the fall of 1982 and in early 1983, unemployment was over 10%. In the Great Depression, unemployment was over 25%. In fact, for many years in the 1960s and 70s, economists said that the natural rate of unemployment in this country was right around 6%. Well, folks, the last time unemployment in this country was 6% was in October of 1983, almost 5 years ago. So we're actually in better shape than what they used to think was the natural level of unemployment. And finally, the third metric that I like to look at is home ownership. 68.1% of Americans own their own homes, and that statistic has held right around 70% for many, many years. And again, going back to my favorite year of 1960, you look at the homes that people lived in back in 1960 compared to the homes that people live in today, and it's qualitatively so much nicer now. Back then, central air conditioning was a luxury, it was not that common. Today, it's a necessity, everybody has it. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, I would be blind if I didn't notice there were problems in the economy. We've got problems with the banks, we've got some problems in the auto industry, we have high gasoline prices. All of these things are out there, no doubt about it. But the economy has weathered storms like this before. We've been through a high inflation period in the 70s, recession in 1982, the collapse of the savings and loan industry in the late 80s. We survived those things. We will survive today's trials as well. There's an old saying, the glass is either half full or half empty. With the size of the economy that this country has, I believe the glass is definitely half full. When Phil Gramm said, "We have never been more dominant," Phil Gramm was right. Mr. Toastmaster.